Our next story is about a meeting that took place in Shanghai recently, a meeting between the US and China. These were informal talks, no government officials were involved. Nonetheless, they were important. It was the first such conversation in 5 years, and it focused on one key aspect: nuclear weapons. America wanted to know two things. Will Beijing issue a nuclear threat over Taiwan? And does its no first use policy, does China's no first use policy still stand? And what was Beijing's response? Our next report tells you.
It was an intense discussion for 2 days. The setting was a conference room in a Shanghai hotel. On the US side, there were about half a dozen delegations that include former officials, even scholars. On Beijing's side too, it was a mix: scholars, analysts, and former PLA officers. So what were the two countries talking about? It was nuclear arms. The focus was mainly on Taiwan. China claims the island as part of its territory, a claim that Taipei refutes. In recent years, Beijing has ramped up its ante around Taiwan, whether it's through statements or military exercises. But is Beijing about to make a nuclear threat? Its officials say no. Washington raised concerns that if China was defeated in a conflict over Taiwan, it might use or even threaten to use nukes. But Beijing has denied any such claims. It's also given Washington reassurances. Reports claim its officials say it will not resort to atomic threats. Now, these are called Track 2 talks. The people taking part are former officials, even academics. They may not set policy, but they speak with authority on the government's position. So these are sort of semi-official talks. They are not Track 1 talks. Those are what happened between governments. In November last year, the countries resumed Track 1 talks on nuclear arms, but those discussions have stalled. So these Track 2 talks are a step in the right direction. These are the first informal talks between the US and China in 5 years, and it focuses on a key issue: nuclear arms. In the last century, the US and Russia ramped up their nuclear arsenal. China was far behind. It didn't focus on nukes, it focused on growth instead. China's first nuclear weapons test was in 1964. But since then, Beijing has built hundreds of nuclear weapons, yet called its arsenal modest. Beijing has stressed on two things: no first use, that is, it will never go first in a nuclear conflict. And the second is minimal deterrence, that is, having just enough nukes to dissuade adversaries. According to the Pentagon, Beijing is on track to double the number of its nuclear warheads by the end of the decade. So from 500 to 1,000 by 2030. Most of its nukes will likely be held at higher readiness levels. So a key question on the US side is, does China still stand by its no first use and minimal deterrence policies? Beijing says it's still business as usual. Nothing has changed. That's China's stance for now. But most analysts believe China's no first use policy is conditional. What those conditions are is something the world is yet to figure out.